Wednesday. I'm Pastor Chad, and this is Moxie Mucho, the dog, but she's not going to be in this. She just was whining at the door, so wanted to pick her up. What we are going to do today is do another Bible study, and what I'm going to show you today is going to blow your minds. I'm just kidding. It might. I don't know. But what I want to do is help you study the Bible yourself. You guys ought to be studying the Bible yourselves. You can't depend on me or the church or whatever. Look at this. We can't even go to the church right now. So you get to the pearly gates or whatever, and God says, hey, how did you develop your spiritual walk? I don't know if he's going to do that. But what are you going to say? You're going to put it on somebody else that you didn't do it? No, it's up to you. What I want to do is show you some tools to make it easier to happen. Because the Bible's a big, complicated thing. So last week we looked at how the Bible's structured. You remember there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it was all about the covenants God made with his people. This week I want to break it down even further. So we're going to take the Bible apart chunk by chunk in just a few minutes here. I was told not to say how long I think it's going to take, because it always takes way longer than I think it's going to take. But, well, let's just get into it here, and I think this will help you to fit all the pieces in the Bible together so you can study it by yourselves. Well, let's say this is the Bible here, and we're going to go chronologically this time. We're not going to get an overview. We're going to go chronologically. And of course, at the start is God. And what is the Bible about? The Bible is about God. And ultimately, the Bible, everything in the Bible is going to be pointing to Jesus. Everything before Jesus in the Old Testament points to him, and everything in the New Testament points to Jesus as well. It's either pointing to him or reminding us about him. So everything centers around God. And we understand God to be the human person, Jesus. So there's God in the flesh. So starts with God, and then I think maybe we're all familiar with God. He created everything. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy said this was widely regarded as a bad move by everybody else. But nevertheless, God in the beginning created the heavens and the earth. So we're just going to look at the people now. Now, the beginning of the Bible, people try to do this all the time, but it never works out very well. They always try to put dates on it. When did this happen historically? The very first part of the Bible is going to be very difficult. So, Genesis chapter 1 through 12, or I should say through 11, excuse me. Genesis 1 through 11 is it's like ancient history. So whenever it is, it's a long, long time ago. God created the heavens and the earth, and he said, I want to give human beings my image, and these human beings are going to take care of my creation. So God's perfectly essential in his own being, I guess, to use like scholastic terms. He doesn't need creation. He doesn't need humans. But what does God do? God, existing in Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, wants to include creation and include humanity into the Trinitarian love and existence of God. So what does God do? He creates a creation, and he gives these little people rule over his creation. He said, I want you to take care of this. Now, creation is good. It says very good, but it's not perfect. What does that mean? It's not perfect. Well, it's not perfect in the sense that God gave human beings tasks to take care of it. He says, I'm going to make a good thing, and I want you to make a good thing a better thing. And that's what we were designed to do. But right away, we blew it. Human beings blew it for whatever reason. There's any number of reasons why we blew it. But Adam and Eve messed it up. Now, the first chapters of Genesis is going to be the same thing over and over again. You're going to hear story after story of Adam and Eve messing it up, Cain messing it up. I'm running out of juice on this one. Cain messes it up. The world messes it up with the flood. Noah's okay, but then Noah messes it up. The Tower of Babel is another big mess up, and everything goes down, 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 down. So God's plan is turning out to be pretty disastrous. First 11 chapters of the Bible, that's what's going on. We see story after story about how human beings are blowing it. And if there's anybody watching, I don't know, is there anybody watching? If there's anybody watching, feel free to ask questions about any of this stuff, and I'll try to get to it. Now, chapter 12 is a big chapter in the Bible. Genesis 12, big chapter in the Bible. What happens in Genesis 12? God says, okay, I am going to do something pretty extraordinary here to redeem the creation, to start fixing everything up. Now, he's been working in chapters 1 through 11, but in chapter 12, he says something really big. He says, I'm going to pick one person, and I'm going to bless the world through this person. So all this stuff that got ruined, I'm going to start to fix through this family. And the family is Abraham. Is Abram. Abram, like if you can picture Abram, this is just a little fun fact. Abram, what he did is he put an extra little ch in his name, Abraham, and in the Hebrew it's like it's representative of God's breath on this person. So now he's not just Abraham, he's Abraham. Same thing with his wife Sarah. It was Sarai, and then what did God do? He put a little ch in it. Now she's Sarah. So it's the representative of now you're humans, but now God's hand is on you. So Genesis 12, all the way through the end, we read about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. These are his family. God made a promise to Abraham that the world will be blessed through that family. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now my blue one's running out of juice. My pens are all running out of juice. Or they're not pens, they're markers. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. This is going to take us to the book of Exodus. Now, it's going to start picking up. Who shows up in the book of Exodus but a guy named Moses. So here we can start to date things, although it's still pretty hard. Like Abraham, we're talking about 2000 BC, if you care about that kind of stuff. Moses, at this point, every kind of big thing, if you want to keep this in your mind, is going to be about every 500 years. So Moses is about 1500 BC. Obviously, they didn't say it back then. They didn't say, yeah, I'm 1500 years before Christ. They would say, what? Before who? Okay. Moses, what happened up here? God made the promise to Abraham. Everything went kind of good with Abraham's family, but what ended up happening is Joseph and all of the promised people, God's people, ended up in slavery in Egypt. So now what does God do? He shows up with Moses and he says, I want you to rescue my people. And so the story goes that God rescued Moses and all his people out of Egypt. Why? So they could worship God again. God's people weren't meant to be in slavery. You need to come out and worship me because I still have a job for you to do. Remember the job that we have here, to take care of my creation. You can't do that in chains. So what does he do? He rescues them. And he brings them to the promised land. So we got Moses. After Moses comes Joshua. He takes over. And they get into the land. Land's very important. And there's a couple themes that go through this thing. Sin is a big theme. And we'll talk about sin in another Whiteboard Wednesday. Land is very important, or kingdom is very important. Well, these are two big things, sin and kingdom. We'll talk about both of those in another Whiteboard. What happens about 500 years after this now? They've been rescued. Now they're in the land. This is the period of the judges. Again, what happens during this part of the story? Everything gets terrible again. I've just realized I've been blabbing on too long. We're about 9 minutes in, but we're doing okay. What happens during this whole section? Same thing that always happens. Everything gets bad. If you read Judges, it's super cringy, and a lot of terrible things happen. God's people just do some remarkably stupid things. And then, so this is what happens again. Even God's people, God's rescue operation with Abraham to rescue the whole world, the rescue operation is getting destroyed by sin. Even when he restores them out of the chains of slavery, they fall into sin over and over again. So finally they say, you know what, there's a problem, we need a king. And this is where a guy named David comes in. DV. Crying out loud. My purple one's doing pretty good. Can you guys read the purple? David is about 1000 BC. Now David, 100 for crying out loud, Chad. David is kind of the big king of Israel. He's almost like the height, you could say, of everything that the God's people, everything the Israelites, the Hebrews were waiting for. This was the pinnacle of everything. The first king was a guy named Saul, but David was the one that really did everything good. After he unified everybody, and they were at the height of their power here, God's people, with King David. What happened after David? His son Solomon. And what happened, well, even during David's reign and during Solomon's reign, you should know by now, it's the same theme that keeps happening over and over again. Terrible, bad. Solomon does bad. David does bad. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, does especially bad. And eventually the nation splits up, and they're at war with each other. And for the next 500 years, this is where you get the books of Kings, 1st, 2nd Kings, Chronicles. That's just that history. What happens about 500 years later, I'm going to put 500 BC, but now we can date things pretty exactingly, the historians can. And in 586 BC, what happened? This is a big one for God's people. Exile. That is, the outside nations came in and wiped out God's people, took them away from the land, which is devastating, obviously. Everything that was glorious with David is done a few hundred years later. Now, God's people are taken away into Babylon. They're in Babylon for 70 years. Now, this period of time, this section here, this chunk, let's say, of 500, is where most of the Bible is going to be written, Old Testament-wise. All your prophets are going to be in here, with a couple exceptions. Amos is a little before that. But basically around here, all your prophets are going to be taking place and talking to God's people either right before or right after the exile. And the last prophet is a guy named Malachi in the Old Testament. He's about 400 BC. Let's say, nobody knows exactly. Say 460, I think, is the general assumption. 460 BC, the last prophet, and then we hear absolutely nothing. That's where the Old Testament stops. And if you were living during that time, in this period, you would not have heard from any prophets or anything like that. There was a lot of things that happened historically. We can talk about that on another Whiteboard Wednesday. But then about 500 years later, what happens? Now we're at zero, about the year zero. The culmination of the whole thing happens with a guy named Jesus. And here's where the New Testament comes in. Sorry for my writing. It's very childish looking because I'm at a weird angle. I don't really write like that. Da-da-da-da. Here comes the culminate. Now what happens with Jesus? God, his initial plan for human beings to bless, take care of the earth has failed. God's rescue operation to fix it. The rescue operation of God's people. Fail, 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 fail. So what does God do? I'm going to come in myself and take care of this whole thing. And the whole New Testament is really the story of Jesus. And then after the 4 books that talk about his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have the book of Acts, which is after Jesus has died and raised and ascended. The church goes out, and the next couple books, all the letters and stuff, they take place between the time of Jesus and about 70 AD. Big thing that happened in 70 AD is the temple was destroyed, and then everybody kind of scattered. So that is pretty much the Bible. The book of Revelation, obviously, is written in this time period, but that's where it all fits in. So that's about kind of an easy way to picture where things go. If you can picture every 500 years, Jesus at 0, the exile 500 before that, David 500 before that, Moses 500 before that, Abraham 500 before that, Adam and Eve and everybody else who knows how long before that. But these are really the big, important areas of the Bible, and everything's going to fit into one of these areas. So, that makes sense? We have any questions or anything? No questions again. Nobody's even paying attention. Anyway, this has been another Whiteboard Wednesday. Be sure to tune in next week for another exciting way to study the Bible. We're going to break this Bible down, and you guys are going to be experts by the time I'm done with you. Hey, good news. We are going to do communion this Sunday at Centerpoint Church. Not at Centerpoint Church, but Centerpoint Church is going to do it. If you'd like to join in communion, we're going to be giving them out Wednesday, today, at 7 p.m. at the church. Also Saturday at noon at the church. So if you want to stop by in a couple hours, I'll be there. See ya!